It seems like every other film that comes out of Hollywood these days is an adaptation of some book or other, and people have quite strong opinions about them. Hi everybody, it's Lydia here. So today's video was inspired by a video made by Hannah over at Story Nut, in which she was talking about book to film adaptations, and she brought up a lot of really interesting points about it, and it really got me thinking, and I will link that video in the description below because it's really fascinating and I really recommend going and watching that. And in general, she just has a really great channel. She's one of my favourite booktubers, so go check her out. So I wanted to talk about this whole topic of book to film adaptations because obviously pretty much every other film that comes out these days is from a book. That's how unoriginal Hollywood is these days, and it's something that I've wanted to talk about for a while, and what with the release of The Hobbit last week, or this week depending on where you are in the world, it's kind of topical. So in her video, Hannah was asking the question whether a film adaptation can actually be better than the book, and this is obviously something which is quite controversial around book circles because in general people tend to side with the book, and honestly I'm probably one of those people. That said, I think equally there are a lot of books which they're either written in a specific style or maybe they're quite difficult to read, which a lot of people for that reason might enjoy the film. I know a lot of people don't enjoy reading Lord of the Rings for that very reason because it is very descriptive, it's very long, it goes into everything in detail, and I love that. That's part of what makes them special for me, but I know a lot of people it's quite overwhelming, and I understand why a lot of people would prefer the films in that way. And from my own experience, I tried to read The Hunger Games and just didn't get on with it. It was the style, something about it, I just didn't enjoy reading it, so I stopped reading it, and this was before the first film came out, so actually it took me a long time to go see that film, but I'm so glad I did because I really do enjoy those films. Not so much the latest one, I had a few issues with that, I just didn't enjoy it as much, but in general I do actually really enjoy those films. So for that reason I do prefer the films to the books because I just didn't like the writing style of the books, and I think that is a reason why a lot of people don't read books or films. I think where a lot of the friction actually comes in regards to kind of the film versus book debate is actually when people try and compare them, and I know I do this. If you saw my Hobbit review the other day, then you know I do this. It's really difficult not to, especially when you're really passionate about a book, to compare it to a film, and that's just, you know, you're just human if you do that. But I think there is definitely something to be said for trying to view a film as separate from the book. There was a film out about 8-9 years ago, I can't remember how long it was now, of the book P.S. I Love You by Cecilia Ahern, and the film honestly is completely different to the book. It is just a completely different story. They change a lot, it's set in a different country, and there is a lot different. So when I view that film, I view it as separate from the book, and I think that is something that we as book lovers have to do in order to appreciate what is actually good about a film. And from my point of view, I do enjoy actually watching that film of P.S. I Love You because it's alright. It's a kind of half decent romantic comedy film, you know, it's no better, no worse than any of the others, and just because I've read the book of it shouldn't mean I should denigrate it. So yeah, it's meant to be based on their book. It's not really, it's more inspired by, and I know from my point of view I do enjoy it more when I just separate the two, and I think that is definitely what you have to do if you're gonna go see a film adaptation of a book that you love. I think really there are two ends of the scale as far as film adaptations are concerned, because on the one hand you can have a film which is so completely different from the book that you do and can just view it differently and as its own version and as a completely different story and not feel like it spoils it. But I think where a lot of the big problems come as far as adaptations are concerned is when they honestly try to make them too religiously close to the books. I think a great example of this is the Harry Potter films, because the first two films in that series are probably the most loyal to the books, and honestly they're the two films that I watch the least. I find them really quite dull. I don't know what it is, they just feel very flat, lacking in energy somehow, and I think a lot of that is a result of the fact that they have been too religiously loyal to the book. Equally, I think that series also shows how you can go too far from a book. The thing with the Harry Potter series is that they clearly tried to be as loyal to the books as possible, and this was obviously shown in the first two films, and generally throughout the series I think they were generally pretty loyal to the books, but I think because they projected this idea that it was very loyal, that they tried to recreate everything exactly as it was meant to be in the books, I think because of that, when they did change things, it was just really obvious, and it kind of jarred a bit for those of us who had read the books. Before I go on, I should say if you haven't read or seen the Deathly Hallows, then I would suggest muting this video for a little bit, because I'm just going to go on and talk about something that happens at the very end. So the most obvious change from the books for me throughout those 8 films was the way in which Voldemort is killed off. So in the book, when Voldemort dies, he dies as a human. And that is such an important part of the story, because he has spent the entire series trying to become immortal and trying to be all-powerful, and when he dies just the same as any other character who dies in those books, and that's just meant to show how mortal he is at the end, and that is such an important part of the story. And for me, and I know equally for a lot of people, the way they changed that in the films just took something away from that. The way he sort of disintegrated into dust, it just ruined that, because it made him into some sort of monster. And no, at the bottom of it all, at the end of it all, he's just a human, and I felt like they just took that too far. And although, as I said, I do think there is a case for films being too loyal to books, I think in this case, when they start changing things which actually have a big impact on the general moral and impact of the story, that's when the issue lies, and that's the big problem I had with that series. Finally, before I finish, I just want to ask the question, can all books be adapted into films? And should they? And for me, I think this is where a lot of the problems that a lot of film adaptations run into, because simply there are some books which work as books, and just either because of the structure or the story, they don't work as films. Now I'm going to mention Atonement here, and before anyone says anything, I do think that film is very good, and I enjoy it, and equally, like P.S. I Love You, I enjoy it as a film in its own right. The issue for me comes where I don't think it works as well as the book. A lot of that book revolves around scenes kind of repeating themselves, particularly in the early part of that book. There are scenes that happen at the same time, but because they're all split into chapters in the book, you understand that you've gone back in time and are reviewing that scene from a different point of view, as it were. And I don't think that really worked on film. I went to see that film with my mum, and she hadn't read the book and I had. And very on in that film there is a kind of time slip back to an earlier point in the scene, and it took me a little while to understand that that had happened, and I've read the book. My mum, however, was just completely lost. She didn't have a clue what was going on, because it just didn't work. In the book it's obvious because it's a different chapter, and you just understand that it's a different point of view, but on screen that didn't work. And I think that's where a lot of films have trouble, because there are some books which simply you can't adapt into film because they work well as books because of their structure, and that structure simply cannot be translated on the screen. Equally, I think there are some books which the story can't be translated onto screen. I know a lot of people loved the film adaptation of The Fault in Our Stars, and I was kind of on the fence about it, to be honest, because I did love the book, I really enjoyed that, perhaps not as much as other people, but I still really enjoyed it. But on screen I felt like it just seemed a bit cliche. I think that kind of works in the book. It doesn't seem as sort of cringy in the book as it did in the film. I felt at times like it was just like a bit, oh my god, really? I think probably a lot of it is to do with the fact that the purpose of a film is to draw you in and complete you, immerse you in that film, and you forget that you're in a cinema or in your living room watching it. With a book, I think that's harder to establish because you're obviously reading words on a page and trying to imagine it, so you're still having to concentrate to a certain extent, and you know you're reading a book and all that jazz. So I think the immersion factor in a book isn't quite as much as there is in a film, and I think in those cases things like The Fault in Our Stars it just doesn't work as well, and those kind of cringe factors really come out more on screen and they don't so much in the books. So to sum up, honestly, I think it is a case of personal preference, and it will vary depending on the book and depending on the film or TV adaptation. And from my point of view, I will always encourage people to read the book before they watch the film, because for me, half of the enjoyment of reading a book comes from your own imagination and creating that whole world in your head. And as amazing as films are these days, and the technology and the effects and everything that they have these days, I think you do lose something by watching a film first, because when you're going to read the book, even if you do read it afterwards and love it, I think when you do read it after you've seen the film, you just have the film world in your head. You know, you never have that chance to imagine that world as your own and for your own self. So I would definitely recommend reading any book before you see any film, but I understand a lot why people just watch the films, even if in some cases it makes me cry, because I would love them to read the book first. So that's it for me today. Let me know in the description below what you think about this, and as I said at the beginning, go check out Hannah's video because it's really interesting and she's much more eloquent than I am at saying these kind of things, so go check her video out. I will see you again tomorrow with another video, but until then, bye!